Listen closely. Can you hear it? That sound like wind through a keyhole, like silk tearing in slow motion. That's the sound of a promise breaking. Not all at once. No, that would be merciful. It breaks the way ice cracks beneath your feet on a frozen lake. First a whisper, then a groan, then the whole world tilts sideways and you're drowning in water so cold it burns. I once knew a man who collected his wife's lies like butterflies, pinned them to corkboards in his study. Working late again, darling. Just coffee with an old friend. You're imagining things. Each one preserved behind glass, wings spread wide, beautiful in their stillness. He said the collection helped him understand something Machiavelli never wrote, but surely knew. That betrayal isn't violence, it's architecture. It builds rooms inside you that you'll live in forever, furnished with furniture you'll never be able to rearrange. The ancient Sumerians had a goddess named Inanna, who descended to the underworld and was hung on a meat hook for 3 days. When she returned, she needed someone to take her place, so she chose her husband. Not out of cruelty, but because love and sacrifice are conjoined twins sharing the same poisoned heart. Modern psychology calls this attachment trauma, but the ancients knew better. They called it Tuesday. Picture this, a cathedral at midnight. Empty pews stretching like ribs in a starved chest. The altar where you once exchanged rings now holds nothing but dust and the ghost of frankincense. This is where promises go to die. Not dramatically, not with thunder and lightning, but quietly, like a candle drowning in its own wax. The stained glass windows still catch moonlight, throwing colors across the floor like spilled wine at a wedding no one remembers attending. A 2024 study from the Journal of Interpersonal Violence found that 68% of men who experienced intimate betrayal reported feeling fundamentally altered, not broken, altered, like a violin restrung with wire instead of gut. It still plays music, but the song has teeth now. Here's what they don't tell you about betrayal. It's not the knife that changes you, it's the hand holding it. When it's the hand that once traced your scars in the dark, that fed you soup when you had the flu, that wore the ring you saved 6 months to buy, when that hand pushes the blade between your ribs, something alchemical happens. You don't just lose trust, you gain a terrible kind of vision. Suddenly you can see through walls, through smiles, through "I love you," like it's tissue paper held up to flame. There's a Portuguese word, saudade, that means a deep emotional state of nostalgic longing for something or someone that one was fond of and which is lost. But there should be another word. Call it saudade inverso, for the relief that comes when you finally stop longing for someone who was killing you softly, note by note, like a lullaby sung in a minor key. The philosopher Kierkegaard wrote that the most painful state of being is remembering the future, particularly the one you'll never have. But I'll tell you something darker. The most liberating state is forgetting the past you thought you had. When you realize that every "I love you" was a rehearsal, every kiss a performance, every promise a placeholder, that's when you understand that betrayal isn't what happened to you. Betrayal is what revealed you to yourself. In medieval alchemy, they believed you had to dissolve gold completely before you could purify it. Solve et coagula. Dissolve and coagulate. Maybe betrayal is just another kind of chemistry. She dissolves you down to your elements: carbon, calcium, iron, salt. And then you get to decide what to coagulate into. Not the same man who walked into that cathedral of promises. Someone else. Someone who knows that empty rooms echo louder than full ones, that broken glass catches light better than whole windows, that scar tissue is stronger than virgin skin. You want to know the real joke? The punchline that would make Machiavelli himself laugh until he wept? The betrayal was never about you. You were just the stage where she performed her own drama of self-discovery. You were the mirror she broke to avoid seeing herself clearly. And now, in your cathedral of broken promises, you sit in the empty pews and realize the prayers you're saying aren't for her return. They're for your own resurrection. Tell me something. Have you noticed how your breathing changes when you remember her lie? That little catch in your chest, like a door closing on a room you'll never enter again. That's not pain anymore. That's your body teaching you the difference between suffocation and breath. Every exhibit is a trap you built yourself. Admission is free. Exit costs everything. Shh, come closer. I want to whisper something terrible in your ear. Something that tastes like copper pennies and old champagne. You never loved her. You loved the idea of being the kind of man who could love her. There. I said it. Now watch how the whole museum of your memories starts to melt like Dali's clocks, dripping off the walls, pooling on the floor where you thought you built your foundation. In Japan, there's a word, tsundoku, for buying books and never reading them, letting them pile up unread. But there should be another word for collecting women like unread stories, each one a narrative you'll never actually live. Just stack on the shelf of your possibilities until the weight breaks the whole bookcase. You thought you were a romantic. Turns out you were just a curator of your own delusions, polishing exhibits no one asked to see. Last week, I watched a man at a coffee shop scrolling through his ex's Instagram like a security guard doing rounds at 3 a.m. in an abandoned mall, checking all the exits, making sure nothing's changed, that everything's still locked up tight in the past, where it belongs. But here's what made my blood turn to mercury. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at himself in those photos, trying to remember who he was when he still believed in the story they were telling. The neuroscientists at Stanford published something devastating in late 2024. The brain processes imagined futures with the same neural pathways as actual memories. Think about that. Your fantasies of her, the life you mapped out in your head while she was already packing her emotional bags. Your brain thinks those things happened. You're not mourning a relationship. You're mourning a ghost story you told yourself so many times it started wearing your grandmother's jewelry. Here's a little fable for you, free of charge. A man falls in love with his own echo. Not like Narcissus. No, this is different. He falls in love with the echo of who he could be if someone would just love him back the right way. So he spends his whole life shouting into caves, into women's hearts, into bottles of whiskey, waiting for the echo to return perfected. But echoes don't improve the original sound. They just make it lonelier. You want to know what Schopenhauer would say about your heartbreak? He'd laugh. Not cruelly, but with the exhausted amusement of someone who's seen this same play performed 1,000 times. He wrote that we're like porcupines in winter. We huddle together for warmth, but our quills hurt each other, so we move apart, then get cold again, then huddle, then hurt, then separate. Forever. The dance of the porcupines. And you thought you were special because your quills drew blood that looked like rose petals in the snow. I'll paint you a scene. It's 2 a.m. in the museum of what you thought you wanted. The security lights throw long shadows. Each exhibit is perfectly preserved. First date at the Thai restaurant. The night she wore the green dress. Sunday morning, coffee and silence. But look closer. See how the mannequins' faces are blank? You never really saw her. You saw the reflection of your hunger wearing her clothes. The Aztecs believed that butterflies were the souls of dead warriors returning to Earth. But what about the butterflies you feel when you meet someone new? Maybe those are the souls of all your dead futures, every possibility you murdered by trying to make it real. The flutter in your stomach isn't excitement. It's a graveyard having a party. A 2025 meta-analysis of relationship dissolution found something that should be carved into stone tablets. 73% of men reported that the hardest part of breakups wasn't losing their partner, but losing the version of themselves they were trying to become. The man who could finally be enough. The man who could make someone stay. The man who could transform his damage into something worth loving. But here's the plot twist. The thing that would make Nietzsche dance until his syphilis-riddled brain exploded. You don't become someone worth loving by being loved. You become someone worth loving by setting fire to the museum. By walking through rooms full of everything you thought you wanted and choosing to want nothing instead. By becoming so comfortable with your own emptiness that when someone tries to fill it, you laugh and say, "No, thank you. I'm using that space for echo practice." The Turkish have a phrase, kara sevda, which means blind love, but literally translates to black love or dark passion. They use it for the kind of love that ruins you. But what they don't have a word for is the strange peace that comes after the ruins stop smoking. When you can walk through the wreckage of what you thought you wanted and feel nothing. Not numbness. Just the clean, sharp absence of desire, like the silence after a bell stops ringing. So here's my question for you, my late-night confessor, my fellow curator of dead exhibits. What if the betrayal wasn't her leaving? What if the betrayal was you entering a museum that was always on fire, where every exhibit was made of matchsticks and gasoline, where the exit signs were written in a language you refused to learn? What if freedom isn't finding someone new to fill your museum? What if freedom is burning the museum down and dancing in the ashes like a lunatic who finally gets the joke? Loneliness is the scalpel that teaches you where you really end and where you pretended to begin. There's a legend about a Russian doctor named Leonid Rogozov who, trapped in Antarctica in 1961, removed his own appendix using local anesthetic and a mirror. Imagine that. Watching yourself cut yourself open, your hands steady despite seeing your own insides, knowing that trembling means death. That's what solitude does to a man after betrayal. It makes him both surgeon and patient, knife and wound, cure and disease. The room smells like old leather and rain. You know the smell. It's 3 p.m. on a Sunday that feels like a funeral for a person who isn't quite dead yet. That person is you, by the way. Or rather, the you that needed another person to confirm you existed. He's dying now, thrashing on your couch like a fish pulled from dark water, gasping for the validation that used to be his oxygen. Let him die. I'm serious. Let him gasp and flail and beg. Watch with the detached curiosity of a Victorian scientist observing an experiment. Take notes if you want. Subject appears to be experiencing acute withdrawal from external validation. Fascinating. The Buddhists have this concept called hungry ghosts. Beings with enormous stomachs but tiny mouths, unable to satisfy their appetite no matter how much they consume. That's what you were in love. A hungry ghost trying to eat another hungry ghost. Both of you starving, both of you convinced the other was a feast. But here's what Buddha didn't mention, probably because he was too polite. Sometimes the cure for hunger isn't food. It's learning to photosynthesize, to make your own light from darkness, your own food from emptiness. A 2025 Harvard study on post-relationship neuroplasticity, God, even the language sounds like surgery, found that men who spent at least 6 months in complete romantic solitude showed increased gray matter in regions associated with self-regulation and decreased activity in areas linked to external reward-seeking. In other words, loneliness literally rewires you to stop being a beggar at your own banquet. I knew a man once who lived alone for 3 years after his divorce. Not lonely, alone. There's a difference, like the difference between drowning and diving. He told me that around month 8, something cracked inside him. Not broke, cracked, like an egg. And what emerged was this strange, wings still wet creature that didn't need anyone to tell it was real. He said it was like discovering you could breathe underwater all along. You just needed everyone else to leave the pool first. Here's what Kierkegaard knew, but wrote in Danish, so most of you missed it. The highest form of despair is not knowing you're in despair. You think your suffering is because she left? No. Your suffering is because you haven't left. Haven't left the idea that you need someone else to make you real, like Pinocchio waiting for the blue fairy instead of learning to carve himself. The ancient Greeks had a torture method called scaphism, where they'd trap someone between 2 boats, force-feed them milk and honey until they, well, let's just say it didn't end well. That's what modern love is, force-feeding you sweetness until you rot from the inside. But solitude? Solitude is fasting. It's choosing hunger over poison, emptiness over decay. Picture this. It's midnight in your apartment. The walls look like they're breathing in the lamplight. You're sitting in the dark, not because you're sad, but because you've discovered that darkness has its own strange comfort, like a womb you can return to whenever the world gets too bright. You're not waiting for anyone to text. You're not checking if she viewed your story. You're just sitting, existing, being a fact instead of a question. The Sufi mystics used to practice something called khalwa, spiritual retreat in solitude. They believed that being alone with yourself was the only way to meet God, because God was hiding in the last place you'd look, inside your own chest, behind all the noise of need. But here's the sick joke. The punchline that tastes like black coffee and cigarettes at dawn. You don't find God in there. You find something sadder and worse. You find the truth that you're just a collection of habits pretending to be a person. A bunch of responses learned so long ago you forgot they weren't yours. And once you see that, once you really see it, you get to choose new habits. Habits that don't include needing someone else's eyes to see yourself. A man in Seoul recently made headlines for marrying himself. The media laughed, called it performance art, a cry for help. But I watched his ceremony online. He exchanged rings with himself in front of a mirror, and I swear I saw something in his eyes that looked like freedom. Not happiness, not sadness, just the clean, quiet freedom of a man who finally stopped waiting for permission to exist. You want to know the real paradox? The thing that would make Nietzsche weep with joy? The moment you truly don't need anyone is the moment you become capable of actually loving someone, not needing them dressed up as love, not fear of loneliness wearing a wedding dress, just love, purposeless, pointless, perfect love, like art for art's sake, like dancing alone in your kitchen at 2 a.m., not because anyone's watching, but because the music is playing and your body wants to move. So here's my riddle for you, wrapped in velvet and thorns. If a man loves in the forest of solitude and no one's around to receive it, does it make a sound? The answer is yes. It sounds like one hand clapping. It sounds like silence learning to sing. It sounds like a surgeon stitching himself up in the Antarctic dark, knowing that the only hands that can save him have always been his own. And why that's the only garden worth tending. I'm going to tell you about the most beautiful thing I ever saw, and it's going to sound like horror. A man standing in his backyard at dawn, pouring salt on the earth where his ex-wife's roses used to grow. Not in anger, in ceremony. Each handful of salt like a prayer to sterility, a love letter to the void. He was making sure nothing would ever grow there again. When I asked him why, he smiled like a saint who'd discovered God was actually the devil, but decided to worship anyway. He said, "I'm tired of things that need me to survive." The Zen masters have a saying, "Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water." But they never tell you about the middle part. The part where you realize the wood was never meant to keep you warm, and the water was never meant to quench your thirst. They were just things to do while you waited to die. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's everything. Here's something that will crawl under your skin and make a nest. A 2024 longitudinal study from Tokyo University found that men who embraced what they called emotional minimalism, actively reducing their capacity for romantic attachment, reported higher life satisfaction than those who continued seeking partnership. Not happiness, satisfaction. The difference is crucial, like the difference between morphine and acceptance. One numbs you. The other teaches you that pain is just another texture in the fabric of being. You know what's funny? Not haha funny, but funny like finding a love letter in a dead man's pocket. Funny. We've created entire industries around the myth that emptiness is something to be fixed. Dating apps, therapy, self-help books with titles like Finding Your Other Half, as if you're not whole, as if you're a broken plate waiting for someone with the right kind of glue. But what if you're not broken? What if you're complete in your incompleteness, perfect in your imperfection, like a Zen circle drawn with a deliberate gap? Enso, they call it. The gap isn't a mistake. The gap is the point. It's where the breathing happens. In medieval alchemy, there was a stage called nigredo, the blackening. Everything had to rot completely before it could be transformed into gold. The alchemists would seal their materials in a vessel and wait, watching through glass as everything they put in turned to black sludge. Most gave up at this stage thinking they'd failed. But the ones who waited, who learned to love the blackness, those were the ones who found what they were looking for. Not gold, necessarily. Something better. The patience to watch things die without trying to resurrect them. Last month, I met a woman at a bar who told me she hadn't been touched by another human in 2 years. Not romantically, touched at all. No handshakes, no hugs, no accidental brushes on the subway. She'd become, in her words, architecturally complete. She said her skin had forgotten it was a boundary and become what it was always meant to be. Just the place where she ended and the world began. Nothing more, nothing less. Schopenhauer wrote that life swings like a pendulum between pain and boredom. But here's what that beautiful pessimist missed. There's a third option. You can step off the pendulum. You can stand perfectly still in the garden where nothing grows and realize that fertile soil was always a threat, not a promise. Seeds want to become trees. Trees want to bear fruit. Fruit wants to rot and make more seeds. It's exhausting, this endless becoming. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is salt the earth and let it rest. The Stoics had a practice called premeditatio malorum, imagining loss before it happens so it won't destroy you when it does. But I'll tell you something darker and more useful. Imagine nothing. Not loss, not gain, just nothing. Imagine being a stone at the bottom of a clear river. No desire to be picked up and skipped across the surface. No fear of being buried in silt. Just the simple, brutal fact of being stone and water forever. There's a mushroom called Xylaria polymorpha, dead man's fingers, that only grows on rotting wood. It's black, looks like charred fingers reaching up from the earth, and it's absolutely essential for forest health. It breaks down what's dead so the forest floor doesn't choke on its own history. That's what you become in the garden where nothing grows. Not dead, but a friend of death, a tender of absence, a gardener of the void. Here's a confession. I haven't loved anyone in 7 years. Not because I can't, but because I discovered something terrible and wonderful. Love is just fear wearing a mask made of roses. Fear of being alone. Fear of dying without witness. Fear that you're not real unless someone confirms it. When you stop being afraid, love becomes optional, like dessert. Nice if it happens, but you won't starve without it. A recent study from the Karolinska Institute found that men who practice what they call emotional abstinence show the same neurological patterns as experienced meditators. Decreased activity in the default mode network, increased present moment awareness, reduced anxiety about future states. In other words, they've learned to stop time traveling. They're here now, in the garden where nothing grows, and they're not waiting for spring. You want to know the most subversive thing you can do in a world that profits from your emptiness? Stay empty. Be the hole in the market's logic. Be the man who doesn't need what they're selling. Be the garden where nothing grows, where no one can plant their flags or their roses or their needs. So here's my dare, my dark invitation wrapped in moonlight and ash. Go outside tonight. Find a patch of earth. Pour salt on it. Not a little, a lot. Kill it properly. Then sit next to it and feel what? Sadness? Relief? Nothing. Whatever you feel, that's your teacher. That's your guru. That's your God, showing you that creation and destruction are just different names for the same thing. And that thing doesn't care what you call it. The garden where nothing grows isn't barren. It's honest. And in a world built on the lie that you need another person to be complete, honesty is the most radical act of all. Freedom is understanding that every cage has a door, and choosing to stay anyway. The last thing I'll tell you is the first thing I learned, but you weren't ready to hear it until now. There was a wolf caught in a trap for 3 days. A hunter found him, expected snarling, fighting, the usual theater of survival. But the wolf was just lying there, calm as a monk at vespers, licking the metal that held him. The hunter, disturbed by this peace, asked the wolf, "This is a fable, remember? Wolves talk in fables. Why aren't you trying to escape?" The wolf looked at him with eyes like frozen honey and said, "I did escape. I escaped the exhaustion of running. I escaped the burden of choosing where to go next. I escaped freedom itself and found something better. The terrible clarity that comes when all your options disappear except one, to be exactly where you are. And that's what no one tells you about being betrayed, abandoned, left to rot in your own loneliness. It's not a punishment. It's a graduation ceremony. You're graduating from the university of believing you have control, matriculating into the doctorate program of embracing your own powerlessness. Nietzsche called it amor fati, love of fate, but he was still trying to sound noble about it. Let me be uglier, more honest. It's Stockholm Syndrome with existence itself. You fall in love with the trap because the trap is all there is, all there ever was. The cheese was always poisoned. The maze never had an exit. And once you know that, Really know it. In your bones, in your breath. You stop running. And when you stop running, something magnificent and terrible happens. You start to see the beauty in the bars. A 2025 study from the Sorbonne, and this will make you laugh or vomit, found that men who reported accepting the impossibility of lasting romantic satisfaction showed elevated levels of serotonin similar to those found in people who'd survived near-death experiences. Their brains had literally decided they'd died and come back. And what they came back as wasn't human anymore. It was something else, something that could love without hope, desire without expectation, exist without justification. I'll tell you a secret that will sound like madness. Every woman who ever left you was doing you a favor. Not in some trite blessing in disguise way. No. She was showing you the truth that everyone leaves. Everyone. Your mother left you the moment you slid from her body. Your father left you the first time he looked away. You've been leaving yourself every night when you fall asleep, abandoning consciousness like a captain abandoning ship. We're all professional abandoners, Olympic-level leavers, black belt deserters. And once you see this, once you really get it, you stop taking it personally. It's not betrayal. It's just Tuesday. The Japanese have a practice called kintsukuroi, repairing broken pottery with gold, making the repaired object more beautiful than the original. But here's what they don't tell you. Sometimes the most beautiful thing isn't to repair the break with gold. Sometimes it's to leave it broken and learn to drink from a cracked cup, feeling the liquid escape through your fingers, knowing that holding on is impossible and drinking anyway. There's a man in Berlin who hasn't spoken in 4 years. Not a vow of silence. He just ran out of things he needed to say. His apartment is full of mirrors, but they're all painted black. When asked why, he wrote on a piece of paper, "I got tired of seeing someone who needed to be seen." This is what happens when you learn to love the trap. You stop performing your own existence. You stop being the protagonist in your own story. You become something simpler and stranger, a fact, a thing that exists without narrative, without arc, without the need for resolution. Kierkegaard wrote that life can only be understood backwards, but must be lived forwards. But here's the joke he missed. There is no forward. There's only now and now and now, each one a trap you can't escape, each one a moment where you're exactly where you are with no alternative. The wolf knew this. That's why he licked the metal. He was tasting his own limitation and finding it sweet. The ancient Gnostics believed that the material world was a prison created by a malevolent demiurge, and that the only escape was through secret knowledge. But they were half wrong. It is a prison. But the secret knowledge isn't how to escape. It's learning that the prison is home, that the bars are bones, that the lock is your own heart, and you swallowed the key years ago. So here's the final paradox. The last Russian doll inside all the others. The moment you truly accept that you're trapped. Trapped in your body. Trapped in your loneliness. Trapped in your need. Trapped in your inability to love or be loved properly. That's the moment you become free. Not free to leave. Free to stay. Free to stop struggling against the bars and start decorating your cell. A philosopher once asked me, "If you could press a button and never feel lonely again, would you?" I said yes without thinking. He smiled sadly and said, "Then you don't understand. Loneliness isn't the problem. The problem is thinking loneliness is a problem." You want the truth? The real truth? The one that tastes like iron and ashes? Every relationship you'll ever have will end. Either in betrayal, boredom, death, or that slow fade where love becomes routine, becomes resentment, becomes nothing. Every single one. And the sooner you accept this, the sooner you can stop treating love like a life raft and start treating it like what it really is. A beautiful distraction from the fact that we're all drowning alone. But here's the thing about drowning, and this is important, so listen close. After you stop struggling, after your lungs fill with water, after you accept that this is how it ends, there's supposedly a moment of pure euphoria. The body floods with endorphins. The brain, finally giving up, gives you one last gift. Peace. Total, absolute peace. That's where I am now. That's where you could be if you're brave enough or broken enough or blessed enough to stop struggling. In the trap, licking metal, tasting your own blood and finding it indistinguishable from wine. Here's my final question, my last whisper in your ear before the credits roll. What if the trap was never meant to catch you? What if you were meant to catch the trap? To hold it close? To make it yours? To discover that the thing you feared most, being alone, abandoned, betrayed, forgotten, is actually the only thing that will never leave you? What if loneliness is God's way of holding you when no one else will? What if the wolf was right all along?